Now, do note, Toby is a trained lawyer chatbot, trained by yours truly. I think it went really well. So I trained Toby in advance. I trained Toby on my classroom notes and some of the material from our reading assignments. So Toby was trained to be, as his name suggests, a relentless advocate, an obstinate advocate, but one that could come to agreement as well. And so Toby was given general factual information about the case, as were the students in class. Toby was also given confidential information that only Toby had. Similarly, the students who represented the plaintiffs were given confidential information. And so we engaged in a negotiation, which I think was pretty realistic. This was a products liability case, and so my class collectively represented the plaintiff, Toby represented the defendant, and we were able to come to an agreement. So I think the negotiation was fairly realistic and like what you might see in practice in terms of the justifications that were given, the specificity of the requests, and the sort of dollar figures exchange. So it's quite impressive.
Be willing to settle for $300,000 with new safety regulations that can be handled however they wish.
So of course I created Toby through ChatGPT. As I said, I trained Toby on my notes for class, and so the goal was that Toby was playing by the same sort of rules that the attorneys or soon-to-be attorneys were playing by. I also tested Toby out to see how he might respond. There's a fine line between being a zealous advocate and being reasonable, and so I wanted there to be a good balance. The topic that we're covering right now in our lawyering class is anger and dealing with difficult opposing counsel. So this was meant to sort of combine a variety of methods that the students have learned about in their readings and in their class materials. So I think he did a good job. So yeah, I uploaded my notes, I tested him, I went back and forth a few times myself with Toby, and I think he did a pretty good job.
Let's see what Toby says.
I did this last year. I research and write in the area of AI myself, AI and tort law specifically. So it's a topic that I think about a lot. I try to use AI in my teaching as much as I can. For example, AI is great for creating hypothetical examples and other sort of factual scenarios. So it occurred to me last year that I might use ChatGPT specifically to engage in a negotiation. I am pleasantly surprised at how it operated this year. Last year's iteration was not quite as advanced as this year's iteration. And I think I will continue to use this going forward. And I think I might even tell my students, this is a very good way to practice for the final exam, because it was so realistic to what I would expect to see in real life, but also how I would hope for them to sort of engage with these issues and questions on the final exam. So I think it's a really good tutorial for students. So last year, I wanted it to be difficult. As I said, we're talking about dealing with difficult opposing counsel right now in our reading and our classroom materials. But last year, it was a little bit too difficult. So the students weren't really able to come to a negotiated agreement. Versus this year, I wanted it and I trained it to be a little bit more balanced. So I wanted it to be difficult, and I built that into its rules, if you will, but also to be reasonable and to be able to come to an agreement if it were appropriate. So I think it is the way that I trained it that is different between last year and this year. Literally, you can create your own GPT in ChatGPT. It's quite easy. It will ask you what rules, well, the purpose of the LLM, the chatbot, what rules you would like it to engage in. So I gave it rules. I wanted it to be concise. I didn't want it to be too verbose. I wanted it to negotiate using the methods and the techniques that we've learned in class. So I literally copied and pasted my own notes into the structure to teach it how to negotiate, and it seems to have abided by those rules. I think this is a fair response. Let's see what Toby says in our final exchange here for today. He's thinking it over.
He's really thinking hard.
Now we're talking. 300,000 plus Bounce Corp agreed to issue updated safety regulations. That's something I can talk to my client about, okay? We get our confidentiality clause, you get fair compensation, and the safety updates ensure future cases won't arise from misunderstandings. This closes the case cleanly, keeps Bounce Corp's reputation intact, and avoids the courtroom theatrics. Wow. I'll agree to $300,000 with confidentiality and updated safety regs. We're done here. Great job! I didn't plan it this way. I really didn't plan on the chatbot coming to an agreement in the way that it did. We sort of ran over time. I don't know if you noticed that, but I was certainly paying attention to the clock. And I just gave the students a final opportunity to provide a counter offer. The students did very well in considering the interests of their client, the goals of their client, also the relevant interests of opposing counsel, and the reality of the non-negotiable aspect of the confidentiality agreement, which was at play here, as well as discussing realistic dollar figures. So if I were my students, I would be incredibly proud. I will tell them on Tuesday when we meet again next week how good of a job they did. And they were really thinking about this in the right way. So I would be proud if I were them. I'm a bit ambivalent about students' use of AI, particularly in the law school environment. My students now, although we used it in class, they are not permitted to use it on their written assignments. I think in the future I will allow students to use it. The tension is wanting students, law students, to develop those analytical skills, right? Which are so important to lawyers and legal analysis. So the concern is that the use of these tools would not permit them to develop those skills. I think AI can be used as a tool to supplement learning. Some of our professors do use these tools, and I think it's great. It really is sort of thinking about how to use the tools and what tools we're talking about as well, right? So there's AI in Grammarly, which I think is fine. It's another question as to how to use these large language models, which is what ChatGPT is, in drafting briefs, for example, and in conducting legal research and writing. So I think there's a balance. I think there is a place for AI in law school and higher education. It really is about, the question comes down to how to use these tools properly. But they are tools, and I think they're really helpful. I think future employers are going to expect law students to know how to use these technologies. I use them myself. It does create for greater efficiency. So in all, I'm an advocate for the use of these tools, but it really depends on how we are using these tools and introducing them to our students. The only other thing I would say is this is a really good tool for students to use for this particular purpose. As students are developing practical skills, which is what we're doing now, negotiation and negotiation skills, these tools can be used to help them with and in developing those extemporaneous skills, right? Is how do we respond in real time in real life in ways that are thoughtful, are reasonable, and in the end represent our clients well. So these tools can be very useful in that respect. Again, I'm pleasantly surprised that we were able to come to an agreement today, and I think they did so well in engaging in this activity.